Hello and welcome to the Business Talk podcast. I am your host Deepak. Let's extend a warm welcome to Dr. James Cortada as he joins us on our podcast. Dr. James Cortada is an historian specializing in the business and economic history of information and information technologies. With over 38 years of experience at IBM, he held diverse roles in sales, consulting, management, and executive positions. He actively participates in the IEEE Computer Society and the American Historical Association and serves on the board of directors for the IT History Society. These engagements significantly shape his research endeavors. Currently, Dr. James Cortada serves as a senior research fellow at the Charles Babbage Institute, part of the College of Science and Engineering at the University Libraries at the University of Minnesota. In this episode, Dr. James Cortada shares profound insights from his widely acclaimed book, IBM, The Rise and Fall and Reinvention of a Global Icon. Dr. James Cortada, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me onto your wonderful series. This is delightful, and also thank you for paying attention to IBM, because I consider it to be one of those unique organizations in an industry where old age is considered to be a company of 30 years old, but this one's 130 years old, almost 140.
Yeah. Dr. James, IBM has been described as one of the most influential companies of the last century. What do you believe were the key factors that enabled IBM to shape global business practices so profoundly?
I think there's several reasons. One is that it participated in an industry that was critical to the development of the world economy of the last 150 years, which is information handling, data processing. I think that was one key success factor there that made it last so long. Another was that the early management of IBM came from another data processing company, NCR, which was considered one of the best run companies in the United States in the late 19th century. So you had a team come over of experienced, successful managers. But the interesting thing that IBM had going for it was that its general manager, president, ran the company from 1914 to 1956. So he was there long enough to impose a way of doing business that happened to be successful because the technology and the operations of the firm matched the needs of the second industrial revolution. You can call that luck, you can call it preparation, but whatever it is, it matched. And he was there long enough that by the time he was gone, nobody knew another way to run the business than the way he had. It's sort of a magic in that. And the two things that they did very well for over a century was they hired really excellent people. You'll never find a stupid IBM person. You may find somebody you don't like, but you're not going to find a stupid person. And they were very careful about doing that. When I joined the company, I had a dozen interviews before anybody would suggest that maybe I should join the company, right? The second thing was the development of a culture that matched the strategy of the business and the marketplace. This is a very important point because we are having discussions all over the world about social media. Are they being ethical or not? Are they promoting propaganda or misinformation or lies? There's a tremendous amount of concern all over the world. There are no exceptions. Every country is going through this right now. It's a conversation about culture. So it's matching culture, strategy, quality of people, and an economic opportunity that continues even to this day to grow. So that would be my response.
Your book highlights IBM's technology breakthroughs, such as the punch card and early computing systems. Which of these do you think had the most lasting impact on modern technology?
Yeah, one of the things is that it built one upon another. So, for example, when the company was put together, it consisted of all kinds of things. Some of it was rubbish, like office furniture. And and quickly the management said, no, we're not doing office furniture. We're going to do punch cards, which was the high tech products of the 1880s, 1890s. And then from that, they said, well, what else can we do? So they incrementally improved that, just like Toyota does with their automobiles, that kind of a concept, continuous improvement. This was before we used that term. And it acquired engineers and scientists and kept investing in them. And then the American government invested in supporting research and development of computers as part of the Cold War phenomena, because computers were starting to be used by governments quietly in the 1940s. And IBM was able to get funded for a lot of that research. And it was able to convert its research and computer government relations into commercial products in the 1950s. And it had an excellent sales force that had developed in the previous 40 years to sell tabulating equipment. So it was able to spread that technology out in business and government. And our customers then came back and said, love your computers, but however, can you add this? Can you add that? What about this? What about that problem? And the company kept responding. And it did that all through the 20th century. So while historians will think of IBM's technologies as breakthroughs from one to another, actually it was more like the Apple strategy of taking existing technologies and reconfiguring them, repackaging them in a different way. Much like in India, you might change a dish by changing the kind of curry you use. And then all of a sudden, your grandmother has 4 different ways to use curry. So it's the same concept. So that happened with tabulating equipment. Then it happened with the first commercial computers of the 1950s. In the 1960s, they came out with a series called the System 360, which all the equipment talked to each other and were compatible, which made it easy to take out a small computer, put a bigger one in, and then a bigger one, and as your needs grew, and it wasn't too painful. And then in the 1980s, it came out with the personal computer. And while other people had done that too, it managed to make it the right configuration, so everybody wanted it. Millions were sold, not hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands, but millions were sold. And now we all have PCs.
Dr. James, IBM faced a near collapse in the early 1990s before reinventing itself successfully. What lessons can other companies learn from IBM's ability to navigate such a critical turning point?
That's a good question. Very good question. Because all corporations, if they last long enough, will go through this kind of experience, and oftentimes more than once. I've given a lot of thought to this issue. I've talked to a lot of people. I lived through it. And here's what I think I've concluded. A couple of things. There were some strategy mistakes made in the 1970s. Essentially, senior executives who had grown up in the company thought that people would continue to buy large mainframes forever. And so they continued to build factories and hire more salesmen and go into more countries. And they continued to sell a lot of computers. However, by the end of the 1980s, about half of all the computers that were sold in the world were not mainframes. They were PCs and mini computers and other devices. And it took a while for IBM to realize that. And when it did, it began to shrink rapidly to control costs, which is what you and I would do. And so they had to lay people off, or to use a nice British term, they had to sack a few people. And that was very uncomfortable because it violated the corporate culture of full lifetime employment. And they couldn't adjust fast enough because of the old paradigm. But then the other part of the story is that IBM's culture was one that accepted the fact there was always innovation going on with technology. Customers are always changing. Customers are always telling us what to do differently and so on. So there was an appetite to make changes. So the real issue is what kind of changes? And just closing a factory is not the answer. The answer has to be new services, new products, and so on. But, as in all companies, you have the politics of, who you're going to blame, who you're going to replace, all of that kind of conversation. And they brought in a new CEO, a new chairman, who recognized the greatness of IBM being that it could provide reliable technologies to everybody. And everybody was willing to be told which mountain to climb. Just point to the mountain. Now, there had been a lot of discussions inside of IBM about what to do. Now, here's a key secret to some of IBM's successes over the years. There are always battles inside of IBM about what to do next. Because you have different divisions, just like Tata has different divisions and so on. And you argue among yourselves, oftentimes for many years. But to be able to persuade IBM to do something, you have to do what we used to call completed staff work. You do the analysis, you find out what the opportunity is, you get the numbers right, and so on. So you have these debates, but then at the end, somebody makes a decision. But because all these debates have been going on, the proposed plans for executing them were already there. So the winner already has his PowerPoint presentation that says, here are the 10 things we need to do and how. And so they could execute very quickly. And that's what they did in the 1990s. So that got them out of that problem, got them into areas that people wanted to have IBM in, such as software and services. It had all been thought out, and they executed on it rather than just simply talk. Because once you make a decision at IBM, bam, everybody runs, in the direction of implementing it. And that's what happened. And this has happened a couple of times at IBM. When computers first came out, the old tabulating equipment had to go away. So they went through this exercise in the 1950s. And so again, they had to do it in the 1980s and 1990s. And I believe they're doing it again, although, I've been out of the company for a few years, but based on what they're saying in public and where their revenue is coming from, it looks like they're now moving into quantum computing and artificial intelligence and the necessary services and software that you have to wrap around those two things. So we're going through that again, and that's one reason why I ended the title of the book, The Rise and Fall and Reinvention, because it does it that way. It's a willingness to do it. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. IBM's history includes periods of flatlining revenue and forced reinvention. In your opinion, what strategies help IBM remain relevant in such a competitive and rapidly evolving market?
I think a dialogue with experts, with its competitors, and most importantly, with its customers, in conference rooms that you and I never see, where there's a humility and a willingness to listen. I think that may be the central gift that the early executives of the company gave gave the firm. And people became dependent on IBM. A personal story here. I called on a office furniture manufacturer around 1990. His company used only IBM computers. It was one of the major manufacturers of office furniture in the United States. And it was at a time when IBM was in trouble. And so we had a meeting about a potential consulting project. And it went like all consulting sales conversations go. What are you going to do? What do you want? How much is it going to cost? All the kind of things. Meeting went fine. And then the president of the company escorted myself and one other individual, as you do, to be polite. He escorted us to the front door of his building and thanked us for coming. But then he remembered something, and he turned around and he pointed at me. He said, "Oh, by the way, do not screw up your company. You are a national treasure." And he wasn't talking about Jim Cortada. He was talking about IBM. So that was his only comment about IBM. But it tells us that if you pay attention to those things. Now, what I did is I took that point and I told my management about it. I told the president of our division about it. And he copied an email that I wrote about it to our corporate headquarters. Very normal IBM behavior.
IBM's corporate culture has been widely imitated. What aspects of his management style made it so iconic, and do you think they are still relevant today?
Yep. From the beginning, there was what we used to call in IBM the grand bargain. The grand bargain says, if you will work for IBM and give it your heart and soul and your best thinking, and not just simply a lot of hours of work, but just emotionally embrace it, we will guarantee you lifetime employment, a fabulous career, and a comfortable lifestyle. And those definitions change a little bit from one country to another, but there was the grand bargain first. And they didn't just talk about it, they implemented it. And to use an American expression, they walked the talk. In other words, they practiced what they preached. And they did this for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 years. And whenever they violated that, and some people would violate it, I mean, there were over 1 million people who worked for IBM over the last century. There always going to be a few people that violate. But whenever it was violated, it punished the company. Okay? So that was part of the culture. Another part of the culture was that you accepted a sense of working intensely in a team-like fashion, with a sense of urgency and with speed. I think those are the words you want to remember. And that allowed the company to keep up with the rate of change in the economy and with their customers and with the technology at the right speed. Now that's very, very important. Most people who discuss business practices and strategies do not mention the whole concept of the right speed and the right urgency. When IBM got in trouble in the 1980s, well, I should say in the early 90s, when the new CEO came in, he made it sound, through everything he said, that the place was on fire. And it was. He says, let's get something done on Thursday, not on next Monday. We got to fix our problem right away. Even if we have to work on during a holiday, we got to fix our problem. So that sense of urgency and speed. And by the way, every manager does that. I would do the same thing. I used to argue with my management. I said, and my people, I'd say, we have financial targets that normally should take 13 months to achieve, but we have to do it in 11 and a half months because we want to go on holiday at the end of the year. And of course, everybody would laugh, but it was also true. So there are always these, the sense of urgency. So that was the second piece of the culture. The third was it was a meritocracy. Uh, it, you got measured on what you got done, not on what you said. What you get done, did you make your numbers? Did you produce enough products? Did you, get enough respect in the marketplace? Uh, and sometimes we would break from that, but it's so embedded in the culture that even though I have not walked into an IBM building in a few years, my guess is that continues today. Because hundreds of thousands of people in IBM and our customers do not know another way to do business. And I just find that absolutely fascinating. And you can see it, for example, I use Apple computers at home. And, Microsoft is fine, because when I was at IBM, that's the standard was Microsoft. But in my private life, I use Apple. And I don't know any other way now to use computers other than Apple. It's now baked into the culture of the Cortada household. And so it's like that sense of urgency, that meritocratic thing, you get measured on performance and the culture of doing things and being willing to make changes, I think is so important in trying to understand IBM. And our customers helped. They told us what to do. Because, we can't remember everything, but they told us what to do. And they said, if you do this, I will buy your thing. But go figure it out.
The book explores the track records of IBM's CEOs. Which CEO do you think made the most significant contribution to IBM's evolution and why?
This is an important question because from the beginning, IBM has always had very strong-minded CEOs who were willing to command and control, to understand the business from the mail room all the way up to the top of the house. And most of them grew up in IBM, so they understood how different parts of the company worked. So while they always tried to delegate out responsibility and accountability, both, responsibility and accountability, especially as the company got bigger, the culture of the company was always the guy at the top, really drove things. So with that in mind, my favorite CEO of all time was the original one, Thomas J. Watson Sr., who ran the company from 1914 to 1956. Now, he was there long enough and was talented enough to create the culture and develop the marketplace that was perfectly aligned with the realities of the economy and the technologies. And he was there long enough to impose his will in a consistent manner from decade to decade. So, for example, his strategies for implementing cultural norms in the company did not change for 40 years. So by the time he died, it was the way IBM worked. It was one of the most respected corporations in the world, and well, you know the story. The second most important CEO was his son, who took over the business in 1956 and ran it to around 1971. Also a brilliant executive, grew up in the company. I mean, when he was a child, 4 and 5, 6 years old, he would be in his father's office. Now, at that age, he didn't know what everybody was talking about, but you can see the culture. The company was the family business, even though it was a publicly traded corporation. And he was the one who basically doubled the size of the company in less than a decade. And he was the one who brought it into the computer era and made it the big mainframe company that it became in the 20th century. So he's number two. And then the third one I would put in there was the CEO who came after IBM got into trouble in 1993, Lou Gerstner. He had turned around three other companies or three other businesses. And so he knew what needed to be done, and he had confidence. So he was as confident in doing his job at IBM and what needed to be done as were Thomas J. Watson Sr. and his son, Thomas J. Watson Jr. Okay? And so those are the three that I would say are the most important. The others were competent, obviously. But three stick out, and you see this in other companies as well. There are always two or three that come to light. So what made them all successful is that they understood the company. They had a great understanding of what the marketplace wanted. They continuously were updating their understanding. They understood that the company was not made out of buildings, money, or computers, but it was made out of people. That was the central asset of the corporation, and they paid attention to that continuously for their entire careers. That's why I picked those three.
Regulatory and legal challenges such as antitrust litigation played a significant role in IBM's history. How does this shape the company's strategies and operations?
Yes, I lived through that period. So for your listeners, starting in the mid-1960s, the American government thought that IBM was dominating the computer industry to an extent that would make it difficult for competitors to compete. We'll set aside for the moment whether they were right or wrong. It turned out they were wrong in the sense that they were concerned about behaviors that by the time they sued IBM to break them up or to stop them, the technology had changed. So again, this issue of how fast do you move? Regulators, the only regulators I see in the world that move as fast as the computer industry are the ones in Europe. Everybody else, including those in India and China and Japan and everywhere else, don't move as fast. But never mind. So the government decided that it wanted to sue IBM in 1968 and actually file a formal legal complaint in 1969, and it gave up in 1982. When Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, he said, "This is stupid." It wasn't working, and by then the company had changed and what have you. Here's what happens when you have antitrust suits affecting a company, because this also happened to Microsoft in the 1990s. When you have regulators coming down on you, or the lawyers, two things happen. One, obviously, is you fight the litigation and the accusations, and you hire hundreds of lawyers to go do that, literally hundreds to do that. So there's an expense of the corporation, cash, that you have to pay out to all these people. But then what happens is that the companies become a bit more cautious about trying to dominate the market or to sell things. They say, well, maybe we should pull back a little bit. Maybe we should not be so aggressive. And so you become a little bit shyer, a little quieter. Even your language changes. So instead of saying, let's go out there and really beat the competition, you'd never say that in a document, because then the lawyers go crazy. You might say, well, we have some challenges with a certain market, so perhaps we should address those in a novel way. You see how the language changes, right? The second thing that happens in a situation like that is that you consult the lawyers more about everything that you do. So at IBM, it seemed that every one of us had a lawyer assigned to us somewhere that we had to get certain things approved with. And that happened at Microsoft and probably happening now at Meta and anybody who's being pushed by the regulators or the lawyers. So that tends to make you more conservative, a little bit more cautious over time. And it's sort of universal. Now, what you do in a situation like that is you either are going to lose a legal case or you're going to agree to make some agreement with the government, and it may be on a piece of your business, but not the whole thing. And that goes on forever. If you are a large corporation, and I don't care where you are in the world, you have regulators and antitrust people concerned in one fashion or another, either because you're compromising the ability to have competition in the marketplace or you're doing illegal things. But one of the things that helped IBM enormously, there were two things. One is that it had impeccable ethics. It really did. You did not break the law in IBM. And you didn't break moral law either at IBM. You just did not do that. And that was one reason why people like to do business with IBM for over 100 years. You just didn't do that. It was more than a religious ethic. It was a moral ethic that, by the way, works great. You know, if you run an ethical company, you're going to do more business than the guy down the street who is immoral. So that helped. But also the fact that we were meritocratic. We were going to figure out how to get around legal problems ethically and how we're going to continue to serve our customers ethically and how we're going to treat our people honorably. So even though antitrust suits were part of IBM's experience, which happened before 1914, which happened with the CEO of IBM and Watson Sr. when he was at NCR. And it happened in the 1930s when he had 95% of the market for tabulating equipment. And it happened in IBM in the 1960s when we had, depending on whose numbers you use, 50 to 60% of the mainframe business. It just was able to get over this. They had the experience. And they understood that there are certain behaviors that you do not do. You don't criticize your competitors. You don't bribe people. So basic rules of business. And I'll tell you something that most people probably don't know about this company, and that is every year from the 1950s to the present, every employee in January has to look at a set of guidelines, of ethical guidelines, and read it, even though those of us who have been in IBM for years had read it, every year. It's always the same. You don't do this, you do that. You don't do this, you do that. And you have to sign a form that says, I understand and what this says, and I agree to abide by them, and I understand that I could be sacked if I violate them. And then, of course, from time to time, somebody does that and you have a public hanging. And, you get rid of somebody and you sort of let it be known why. And everybody goes, ooh, they're serious. And so you behave.
Dr. James, my last question. In a world dominated by new tech giants, what role can IBM play in the next phase of technological and business evolution, especially in the era of cloud computing and AI-driven business solutions?
Yeah. Begin by understanding the historical reality. IBM has been playing in these areas since the beginning. So, for example, artificial intelligence since the early 1950s. In other words, it had scientists who were playing with it, working with it. as did everybody else, whether it's the great universities or the military or our competitors. So that's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is that they also have several thousand scientists, computer scientists. So, when you look at cloud and quantum computing and so on, they've been there also from the beginning. They had no choice. It was just part of the reality. Cloud computing is a major evolution of telecommunications. And I don't want to simplify this because this is very, very difficult subject, but IBM has been involved in providing telecommunications for data, moving it from one machine to another, from one place to another, since the 1950s. And so these are subjects that they've known for a long time, and they've evolved over time like everybody else in the industry. That's very important. So again, this whole issue of timing and understanding when. Now, the difference with IBM and cloud computing is that when cloud computing became fashionable in the 2010s, or actually in the first decade of the new century, the initial thinking of the first people to get into it was, oh, let's make cloud computing available to everybody. And well, the problem is that IBM knows its customers, and it knows that no customer of IBM was going to put all their data processing, all their IT into one basket. Your mother will tell you, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because if you drop the basket, you're going to break all the eggs. So you put it in 2, 3 baskets, right? Customers did that. They said, well, we're not going to put everything out on the internet, especially our secret stuff, we'll put out stuff like how to pay people or education or whatever. What IBM knew from its years of working with customers and computers in general is that customers like to use computing that is specific to the needs of an industry. So they early on realized that what they needed was cloud computing for banking, cloud computing for insurance, cloud computing for manufacturing, and so on. That takes a little bit longer to develop because you have to be specific in an offering, not just put it out there and say, go do it. Same thing with artificial intelligence. You can't just put a software tool out there because the only people who run out there and use it will be university students writing their papers. You got to get serious about this and say, well, what exactly am I going to do in healthcare? What am I going to do in space travel? How am I going to use quantum computing in the pharmaceutical industry to cure cancer? Those are very difficult to do, but when you do it, it sticks. And already the company has for 15 years said they're getting into quantum, they're getting into a cloud, they're getting into artificial. And these things take 10, 20, 30 years to do. Everybody thinks, oh, gee, it just started in November 2022, and all of a sudden we got a new round of AI tools. No, that's rubbish. It took 25 years to get there. Same thing with COVID vaccines. Everybody said, oh, COVID vaccines, they got it done in less than a year. No. You go talk to the scientists who are working on the thing. They've been working on COVID vaccine type cure since the 1990s. That's the same thing what's happening today.
As we conclude this insightful episode, let's take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. James Cortada for joining us, sharing his wealth of knowledge. In this episode, Dr. Cortada has not only offered profound insights into the history of IBM, but also illuminated its remarkable capacity for reinvention and adaptation in a rapidly changing world. His book, IBM, The Rise and Fall and Reinvention of a Global Icon, stands as a testament to the enduring significance of innovation, leadership, and resilience in shaping the future of technology and business. Thank you, Dr. James Cortada, for an engaging and thought-provoking conversation, and thank you, our listeners, for tuning in.
Thank you.